Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome back to America's Heroes Group, this time with our roundtable Mental Health Matters with our partner, NAMI, Contra, Costa. Today is Saturday, November 4th, 2023. November is Military Family Appreciation, National Family Caregiver, and Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month. And don't forget, November 11th is Veterans Day, so let your veterans in your neighborhood, in your community, and your family. Our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host, Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith. Our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Arnold Productions. And we have our partner with us, Gigi Crowder, Executive Director of NAMI Contra Costa in California. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And that's an advocacy group founded by family members with people with mental illness. So we're going to talk about California's care court efforts that modernizes behavioral health to address homelessness in their state. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So what is California's care court? Explain that first.
So it's the CARE stands for Community Assistance, Recovery, and Empowerment. And it's a court setting, much like many jurisdictions have behavioral health court. But this one is specifically designed to address the needs of individuals who are living with the most severe mental illnesses on the schizophrenia spectrum. We in California have, like many other states, a major issue with those that are unsheltered because we have not put in place an appropriate response to those in substance abuse, even if they're self-medicating. So that's what's contributed to our unsheltered population here. So our governor, Newsom, wants to take some of the funding that we have for what we call our Mental Health Services Act and use it to address the individuals that have gone untreated for their mental health challenges and are therefore typically not able to remain in a residence or in residential treatment programs without, like, it's somewhat like a conservatorship, without a mandate from the court. So it would be a 24-month program for those that are, and it'd be court ordered, and they'd work with a team with the outcome being housing for those individuals.
So instead of being a ward of the state, which is the case in a lot of areas, a lot of parts of the country, they would have their own. They would still have their independence, but be able to get services and help in order to get off shelter or get housing, but they have mental health issues.
Yeah, it's a community approach. So rather than have the individuals be institutionalized, they would work with a care team. They would have a public defender that'd be working with them, and they would be mandated to take their medications, have a treatment plan in place. But the most important part is a housing plan.
Mm-hmm. And it's important for people to understand that when you're ward of a state, you really don't have any control anymore. You're pretty much being labeled as incompetent. So you have to do what the court tells you to do. You have to have someone that does things for you. You don't get the chance to even spend your own money. You have to do what they tell you to do. You're pretty much almost like a child as a ward of the state. But in this case, they have their independence, it sounds like.
Exactly. So, it's managed by a care team, but they want heavy involvement from the individual. A lot of times we are understanding that you need to have a client-centered approach if you want the individual to actually participate so that they're more self-directed about the decisions that are made for them. And in most jurisdictions, we are not even reaching the individuals that are most in need. We see them when they're incarcerated, and sometimes they're released without a diagnosis of a mental illness or a substance use. So that's why we say Los Angeles County in California is the largest mental health facility in the state, but it's the jail.
Yeah, so we say the same thing about Cook County Prison in Chicago. It's crazy because there's such a connection between mental illness and our mental health. I hesitate to use the word mental illness, but mental health or deficiencies in mental health and homelessness. Because someone could be completely functional to an extent, but there's certain things, psychological issues, things like that might make it hard for someone to just do the simple things to get them off the street.
I agree, and I did hesitate from using the term mental health until I started working with the individuals that have the more severe illnesses. And I think sometimes if we don't just label it as what it is, which is a debilitating illness, and we've had in recent, maybe the last 10 years, a decade, we talked about recovery and how important it is to recover. But I don't want to glamorize mental illness. There's people who have schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. They could do everything that the doctors have prescribed them to do, and the symptoms are such that even with following a medication regime, they still are symptomatic. So I think when we had kind of moved away to using terminology like health, it connects those people to the general population as if they can do some things themselves to support their wellness. And working in the field for as long as I have, I'm well aware of the fact that for some individuals, they need a lot more than than we have been able to offer them in the past. And they need that governance. You mentioned almost childlike. And it's sad because we definitely do understand it for older adults who might live with dementia and Alzheimer's, that we would not, allow them on their own to just make decisions that could harm them. And I think we need to move back to understanding that people who live with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, sometimes are in that place. And so there's this debate between family members, which is I'm one, and peers, people who have personal lived experience who say no forced treatment. But in my history working with people with the more severe mental illnesses, if you just leave them up to their own devices, that's how people end up unsheltered and living on the street.
Mm-hmm. So how is California's care court trying to modernize behavioral health in order to help homeless people?
Well, I mean, the governor, who I believe wants to be the mayor, the president of this United States one day, and he probably would get elected if he could solve this homelessness issue. But it's going to take $14 billion in a multi-year investment, and they're going to, they say, provide 55,000 new housing units and have treatment slots as well. And then they're doing this by taking funding away from what was our Mental Health Services Act, which it's so far there's no additional dollars going to support it. So they had some conversation about bonds. It was at first pushed out to a much later date, but then now he had headed on the ballot for this year, and it's likely to pass just as the Mental Health Services Act did, but it's bridging the gap with housing and behavioral health in a way it has not been done before, and it'll allow for some of the units to be for people who are on Medi-Cal, so that we can also provide more behavioral health services. But for those individuals with personal lived experience, they're saying that it's forcing treatment on them.
So people are complaining that it's going to force treatment on them. Is that what I heard you right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we understand conservatorships that are time limited, and when people are deemed by a doctor, they can get conservatorship. You mentioned it earlier; it's like being a ward of the state. But for a lot of these individuals, they don't have connection with family to push the issue about getting them any help. There was the assisted outpatient treatment programs, which was also connected to the court, but it gave the power kind of to the judges, and you had to kind of have like 9 markers. And so there's a lot of people who don't have contact with the behavioral health but are in desperate need, so they haven't been hospitalized, but they're on the street and they're chronically ill. So this one kind of captured those individuals who've kind of been the ones left behind, who end up more often going to jail versus going to any treatment facility and, self-medicating. And so I'm kind of on the fence in some ways about the rollout and how the governor is doing it, because I certainly don't want to see treatment dollars being taken from Mental Health Services Act. I'd be okay with another tax, actually, that allows for Californians to give toward housing.
Or they could do a bond offering, I think you mentioned earlier, so doing a bond offering to raise money for the care, it's this high interest rate environment that we're in right now. You could do a bond that pays 7%. Maybe that would be attractive to people across the country. People in the state of California, very wealthy state, had a lot of very wealthy people that would love a 7% bond. Backed by the government, backed by the state of California. The thing is, I think you touched on too, which I think is really, really interesting, is that you have this idea of, which happens in the civilian world all the time, and in the or let's say civilian world, people who are not necessarily in a government program. There's people that are using private resources to try to get a family member to take their medication. Or they oftentimes will say, if you don't take your medication, and you get your paycheck's getting cut off, or your stipend or your allowance is getting cut off. Using that same idea for I can see being controversial for people who are getting housing. To say if you don't take your medication, you lose your housing. And then with that, back to that argument about, or that cry about forced medication. Still you have to take your medication or certify that or prove that you don't need the medication in order to stay in your house. But it's a tricky situation. But what is the consensus in right now about that topic?
I'll say that this group of individuals are usually individuals that don't have any connection to even getting Medi-Cal. Mm-hmm. Like, they're so far, disconnected that they don't have a mailbox where they would even get mail. So their Social Security, that they're likely eligible, they don't get it. They don't have any income coming in.
Right.
And so that's the tragedy of how we've not been able to meet them. I was saying earlier, most counties and state jurisdictions only touch about 30% of the people who might be eligible for Medi-Cal and county rent programs. So we have not done the best job of identifying people. More often when they show up in the system, they show up in jail, not in a treatment program. And even if they show up in a treatment program, the tracking, the follow-up, all that's needed to connect them to a case manager so that maybe they could, recognize the fact that they need additional support to get into mental wellness or balance, even with living with a major diagnosis. We just have not done a good job of keeping those individuals in a treatment plan that's worked. So part of this would be working with court-ordered, and much like behavioral health court, if they're in violation, they could actually be put on a conservatorship. It's somewhat of an alternative to that, but supposed to be more community-based and more input from the individual and other social services departments that haven't always coordinated with behavioral health.
I can see someone standing in front of a judge right now and saying, you can get back on your meds or you can go to jail. But if you go back on your meds, we can get you a house, we can get you this and that. We can help you address some of your medical needs and things along those lines, or you can go to jail because you're constantly disrupting society. You're constantly doing this or doing that, which lands you back in prison, lands you back in jail. It's an interesting question, but at the same time, I think it's something that we got to go down that path and figure this out because we have to have that hard conversation to find out what really works and what really helps people.
Yeah. And a lot of times the answer is hospitalization, which of course drives costs up. When a person, has been living for so long on the streets, I don't always feel like they're ready to just get put in an apartment. There's something called a housing first model, but I support housing that heals. So you can't just give a person a Section 8 voucher or even furnish their place and say, here, now you're ready to live on your... Not when they live with severe mental illness. Exactly. I mean, the med regimen becomes very important. And if you don't have those wraparound services, you're on this vicious cycle that we've seen people get on many times, like through COVID. Our team at NAMI Contra Costa, we would go out recognizing that there needed to be a connection to individuals getting vaccinated who are sleeping, I would say people who sleep under the stars every night while everybody else is moving around and getting vaccinated and sheltering in place. Many did not have a place to shelter. So we knew that a lot of those programs that was supporting them, like churches, went away. Mm-hmm. They were sheltered. So we, double masked and wore gloves and went out and gave them the essential food that they need. And in the conversations with a lot of people, their family members were looking for them. So we used our cell phones to reconnect people because, perhaps the last time I saw you, you'd stolen something from the house and you were self-medicating. So we told you couldn't come back. But now with COVID out there, a lot of the family members rethought that position. And we did the part around educating them about, you only saw the substance abuse. You didn't see the mental illness part. So let's let's have you learn a little bit more about what that is so you can better support your loved one. And they're more likely to have success with getting on meds, following the regimen if you have family support. So this community model tries to, use a whole person care approach so that individuals would be willing to, to get back to a place of health.
Mm-hmm. And the thing, like I mentioned before, is that homelessness is not like a one thing or one issue type of situation where there's one thing happened to you, you lost a job, and all of a sudden you ended up homeless. There's usually a snowball effect of how a person goes from being functional and living in a house and doing what every normal person does every day in society to being out on the street. And even that process, I say this over and over and over again because I've seen it firsthand myself. That process of going through that downward spiral could even trigger mental health issues and trauma. The fact that to get built, the process of losing everything you have and ending up in that place can trigger all types of mental illness situations and trauma that might make it hard for you to get off the street. So you have to, that comprehensive, holistic approach is so critical because it could be some drug issues or some alcohol issues involved. There could be some family trauma, sexual abuse involved. There could be something even deeper than that. Maybe like you mentioned, like a person could be schizophrenic, or they could have other mental health issues that, are really affecting their perception of reality. And that's a whole big thing. That's not something that you can't send a police officer out there and just go and arrest somebody and put them in jail thinking they're going to learn their lesson. They have to go and get rehabilitated in some kind of way and get all the full gamut of health resources available to them, and they don't have any money. They don't have any family. They don't have they don't have anything to fall back on to help them through this.
And all of that typically, does happen, like, Glide Memorial in San Francisco is probably the largest faith base that we could identify in California that does the work. And for many years, they've been compassionately embracing individuals. And when they can, they have been able to, close the loop and get people back into care. But so often the individuals don't have the continued services that they need. There's threshold, like you can have a case manager, and then once you're doing well, you lose the case manager. And it's almost as if people don't understand the circular nature of mental illness. And you could be taking your meds sometime, and the meds are no longer effective. And sadly, a lot of the medications come with horrible side effects that would make one not want to take them. So they stop taking the meds because they're not working for them anymore, because it's not the right dosage, a variety of different reasons. So we're hoping that if a person connects with a care coordinator and a psychiatrist, then we can improve the treatment regimen for the individual and get them into a place where it's not just being treated like a number and the individual is not given individualized services, because that's what's really needed. And that's what, for me, when I start looking at the way some groups of people metabolize medications compared to others, like it's well documented, African Americans, who is the largest number of the folks that we're talking about who are unsheltered and living with a mental illness on the street and too often incarcerated, they get the same regimen with no consideration. So a lot of times you'll see them over-medicated and then not feeling like themselves. We work with family members who for years are trying to get services for their loved ones, and often they get them once the person has, been found incompetent to stand trial, and they've been doped to a point where you don't recognize your child anymore. You don't want them so, drugged that their personality is gone. And a lot of times the family members will tell me, well, he's not the same person because he's not even asking about money anymore. We knew what would get them excited. They're not excited. So just trying to find that balance where the individual can, and I always say, connect to their purpose, and despite living with a mental illness. So those are the kind of conversations we have at NAMI Contra Costa with people. You've been out here for a long time. Do you think you might be ready to try something different? And then we try and connect them to services without this mandate, with just kind of that old-fashioned compassion and caring and tapping into the hurt and the traumas that the individuals have been carrying. And I know personally when it's worked most is when you've connected them with a faith community.
Because oftentimes the faith community is an institution that is it's not just one person, or it's a group of people, a family of people. That's actually so it's like you're assimilating a person into a society or a culture. As opposed to just one person, showing up every now and again to give you some advice or help you with something or whatever. You have a whole network of people that you can fall into, like as a substitute family in a way. Connection is so important. So, and then the other key ingredients of connecting people is that then they get the messaging. You're not doing this on your own. There's a higher power, however you defined it. So even for people who have substance abuse issues that don't live with mental illness, the ones that are most successful is because they recognize they can't do it alone and they need a higher power to walk with them in the journey to wellness. And I think also putting yourself back, whether you call it a higher power or a God or whatever you call it, the idea of putting down your own ego and saying, okay, I need help. I don't have all the answers. I make mistakes. I do things wrong. There's got to be a better way to do things and a way that I don't know about. So let me go find out that way, and let me be humble a little bit. Let me humble myself and try to seek something greater than myself.
And when we've had, when we've had those conversations with people who have had the highest forms of schizophrenia with a lot of, symptoms, they even, get it that, and it's almost like a relief. Are you sharing with me that I don't have to battle these voices and all of this alone, and that if I do take the medication, and that maybe God purposed me to be the person who would have this illness, and maybe I just need to trust the doctors, that we've made a lot of progress with that. But more important with saying, what kind of life do you want to have? Because you're not happy with this, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, laying a tent, going away, and then having law enforcement pick up your tent and your sleeping bag, and then you got to start all over again.
That's so disheartening when you see that. I've seen it happen so many times. And a lot of times the person who's going through homelessness, we've all seen the big, tent where there's like 1,000 things, looks like a big pile of refuge and trash is all kind of cobbled together in this big ball of stuff and underneath a viaduct. We've seen all that. We've all seen that stuff. But to that person, that's all they have. That's their home. And when you take that stuff away from them, that is devastating. That's like if you came back to your house and it was inflamed, and it was burning up, and all your stuff was in there, and and everything you own was in there. That's how they feel, and they go through it over and over and over.
Exactly. Again. And new legislation, especially in the city I am, and we get donations for sleeping bags because in most counties they can predict how many people are going to die from hypothermia, but they can't figure out how to keep them off the streets. So we get tents and sleeping bags, and one of our local jurisdictions 2 days after we gave all of that out, they came, and they're supposed to give notice, and they cleared it. And so I'm thinking, here we are raising funds for all of this and giving it away. So I sent an invoice into the city. They haven't got paid yet, but bottom line is the tears when we've seen when people have gone back. And I'll say a large number of the people we've been working with are vets, and things that connected them to what's important to them through their history of having been a vet, just gone.
Service medals that they got when they're in the military.
Exactly. All of those type of things. And then people have so many rules about who can be and go into the shelters. Well, you can't take your animal. Well, there's a whole culture of why a lot of times people who are unsheltered have a pet. Their best friend. So they don't want to go in if they could leave their pets behind. And then some of them had really rigid rules around no smoking, cigarettes, no this, no that. And it's like, I'll just take my chances on the street. And many women, they definitely don't want to go into a co-ed shelter because they're more at risk.
Or they have children.
They have trust. Yes.
And if God forbid you have a child that's over 16, and then now that child is looked at as a boy, because now that boy is looked at as a man, and now they want to put that young boy with the men. inside the
Yes.
shelter and so on. I always thought it'd be a good idea, and I repeat this idea oftentimes. And I think it's not, and we need to kind of come together and share ideas. People that have worked in the with the homeless community, and show some of the things that we have. We have so many resources at our fingertips we could be using and utilizing, and things we can incorporate in our everyday infrastructure. Having community rooms in hospitals and police stations. Right now in Chicago, there are we have a big migrant situation. I said this last couple weeks ago in our show. Migrants are coming in, and so the police stations have been giving refuge to the migrants here in Chicago. There's tent cities around. It's great and to an extent because it's working. It's better than the alternative, but there's tent cities all around these police stations. Almost every police station in Chicago now has a tent city. And they don't remove them or anything like that. Some states haven't had that. You might have that there in California. I'm not sure, but you see that happening, and the police are allowing even social services and people, the nonprofits, to come in and help them. You could have community rooms in police stations and hospitals where it's just open rooms. It could be multi-purpose rooms that people could come and get out of the cold when it's freezing, when it's 20 degrees below zero. That's a place for them to sleep. They're already doing it in the lobbies. They're already going to the police stations and doing that in the lobbies. They're already doing that in the waiting rooms at public hospitals. They could make great spaces for them to do this safely, and to also be an avenue where they can get social services. People could come in once a month or once a week or every night, and interview people to get them health care and get them, off the street, help get them off the street. So, well, that's certainly an approach I would support. Sadly, in Oakland, California, you can be parked right in front of the Oakland Police Department and get your car broken into. Unfortunately, that's a big problem in almost every major city nowadays. Gigi, thank you for your time. We ran out of time, so we got to have you back. And I would love to have you in a part 2 about this conversation, because homelessness is something that we talk about often on our show, and this is a really good topic to kind of explore. And I would like to see how California's efforts, because it's going to take all 50 states to do what they do and to share these ideas back and forth to understand how to solve this problem, and we can at least get ahead of the problem better than what we're doing today.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
This is America's Heroes Group. If you have any questions, make sure to email us at info@americashg.org. Also, you can reach us at 312-803-2618. That's 312-803-2618. info@americashg.org. And check out our redesigned website, americashg.org. Redesigned and new and improved. Thank you for your time. Check us out on YouTube and Facebook, and we'll see you next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you can, donate. We're a 503 nonprofit. All your donations are tax deductible. Appreciate your time. See you next week.